All right, next we're going to look at cartilage. And this is a tissue that has a lot of buoyancy and it's gel-like but slightly more hardened ground substance. Cartilage is also sometimes known as kind of like a whitish gristle of the body. When we talk about cartilage, we're talking about hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and also fibrocartilage. And all of these cartilages are avascular. They don't have blood vessels. But they also don't have nerves. They're not innervated. So they have to get their nutrients by the vascular perichondrium, which is dense fibrous connective tissue that surrounds cartilage and kind of acts like a girdle to it. So we're able to get some nutrients by diffusion. But when it comes to cartilage, we're going to be seeing that the ground substance is not only kind of rich in those starchy proteoglycans, it also has a lot of collagen. And that while it makes the extracellular matrix look glassy and transparent, really doesn't allow the cells to move about. The chondrocytes, or the mature cartilage cells, actually have to live in cup-like structures known as lacunae. So those lacunae are where we could expect to find cartilage cells. So here are the three types of cartilage. You have hyaline cartilage, which is the most abundant type of cartilage, and it's located at the ends of long bones, the ribs, in your voice box and your windpipe called the larynx and trachea respectively, and the bronchi, parts of your nasal septum. It even makes up the embryonic skeleton before it turns to bone. Then you have fibrocartilage. It's found at your knee. It's also the anterior articulation point of the pubic bones. That's called the pubic symphysis. And it's an intervertebral disc. So it's part of what's between your vertebrae. And then last but not least, elastic cartilage, which is dominated by elastic fibers in the ECM. So it can bend and then have structures go back to their original shape. This is located in the external ear and the epiglottis. Your epiglottis is a piece of elastic cartilage that closes off your voice box called your larynx, so that when you swallow food, it goes into your esophagus and not into your windpipe. The general function for all cartilage types is support and resisting compression. Fibrocartilage probably does the best at resisting compression and acting as a shock absorber, and it's great at preventing bone-to-bone contact. Hyaline cartilage is a little bit better at reducing friction between bony surfaces as they rub together and is more flexible than fibrocartilage. And then elastic cartilage is the most flexible because of its elastic fibers, so it's great support, but it really can tolerate that distortion without being damaged, so it can return a structure to its original shape. Just think about bending your ear. It goes right back to how it looked after you bent it. So a little bit more on cartilage. We can see here in this image where it's located. You can see the epiglottis in the small left picture, the ear, that's where elastic cartilage is located. And elastic cartilage looks similar to hyaline, except it has elastic fibers around the cup-like lacunae in its matrix. We also can see where we have hyaline in that kind of lighter blue in your larynx, your trachea, the bronchi of your lung. It also connects your ribs to your sternum. That's called costal cartilage. It's at the ends of long bones, especially those of your limb. That is called articular cartilage. In your nose, so there's nasal cartilage. And if we were looking at the embryonic skeleton, it would be there as well. And then fibrocartilage is not in as many locations. It's in the front of your hip bones, connecting them at their most anterior point, called the pubic symphysis. It makes up part of the meniscus of your knee, which is a pad-like structure. And so we find that fibrocartilage there in between your femur and your tibia, and it's also in between your vertebrae. So it makes up part of the intervertebral disc. So those are the basics for cartilage. The reason we talk about cartilage right before talking about bone is a lot of bone at one point was cartilage. So it does have some similarities in structure. It's still going to have cells stuck in cup-like structures called lacunae. But bone has calcified connective tissue, so it's better for supporting and protecting your body's various structures, especially because it has two types. A very strong spongy bone that's found at the heads of long bones, in the middle of flat bones, but it's porous. It can store bone marrow, but its curved structures provide a lot of strength. Then you have compact bone. Compact bone is dense, no visible spaces, and it makes up a lot of the external layers of bone and can store calcium. But it's also really useful for bringing in blood vessels. via many channels that it has within its structures called osteon. Osteons are going to be the main structural and functional unit of compact bone. So when we're talking about bone, we like to think of just individual bones often, or maybe just the skeleton, but you can use bone to refer to an entire organ. There's epithelial tissue and muscle tissue, and there's also blood vessels inside of bone. But we can use bone as kind of just a typical idea or statement as we're talking about a type of tissue, and usually then we might call it osseous tissue. So you might have already guessed where bone is located. It's in the human skeleton, and it has many functions including storing fat, being the location of hematopoiesis, which is blood cell production. It provides protection. Think of the rib cage providing protection for the heart and the lungs. And it gives a lot of structure and support to the human body. And here we want to briefly look at that osteon. So osteons are the structural and functional unit of compact bone. There are many layers or rings of long cylindrical structures made up mostly of collagen, but it also has calcium laid into that matrix, making it hard. Now, each osteon has a central canal where you're likely to find lymphatic vessels and blood vessels, and maybe even a nerve. The many rings that go around the central canal are called lamella, and in between the lamella, or concentric lamella, there are different cells that are connected via canaliculi. The cells are sitting in lacunae, and the cells are called osteocytes. And the canaliculi are small canals that connect all of the cells to the central canal and each other. So again, this is just the basic structure of an osteon. You'll learn a lot more about the anatomy for bone when you move into later chapters. And so here we just kind of have an overview of that basic structure. And then last but not least, we have the only fluid connective tissue, which is blood. It is made up mostly of extracellular matrix, but it's a fluid matrix called the plasma. There are protein fibers dissolved in the plasma, but they're not solid. The cells of blood are red blood cells, called erythrocytes, white blood cells, also known as leukocytes, and platelets called thrombocytes. Now, this is the only connective tissue that doesn't come from mesenchymal embryonic tissue. It instead develops from a blood stem cell called the hematopoietic stem cell. So hemat or hemato means blood, and poietic or poiesis means generating. So this is a blood generating stem cell. And its general functions are aiding in immunity thanks to the white blood cells, participating in blood clotting thanks to platelets, and delivering nutrients, hormones, and respiratory gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. And that's going to be done mainly by the erythrocytes or red blood cells. But plasma also helps, and plasma also helps transport waste products and ions throughout the body. Hormones are also something that we've talked about coming from endocrine glands, and they're secreted directly into the blood. So it makes sense that a function of blood is to carry them. So that's really all we're looking at blood at this point. There are different white blood cells, like the macrophage and the lymphocyte. The macrophage is actually a differentiated or slightly changed monocyte, and those don't have granules that are activated, whereas neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils have granules they use as defense against pathogens or things that cause disease. All of the granulocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, are phagocytic to some degree, so they can also destroy pathogens or things that cause disease and really help with that immunity. So that is our quick look at the connective tissues, and make sure that if you haven't watched the other videos that you follow up with muscle and epithelial tissue and nervous tissue. But those are our 4 classes of tissue. But they all have individual tissues under them with their own location and function, things to definitely know going into your next exam.